Have you ever stopped scrolling through your feed and just wondered what actually gives someone the authority to speak on behalf of the Creator?
That is, yeah, that is a profound question.
Right, because, I mean, you see it all the time now. In a world completely saturated with online teachers, influencers, and self-proclaimed prophets, who actually has the right to represent Yahweh?
Honestly, it's one that gets glossed over far too often in our hyper-connected culture.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone has a platform today. They have a ring light, a microphone, and an opinion.
Exactly.
But when you are claiming to speak for a king, you must be appointed by that king. The implications of that are massive, yet people treat it like, I don't know, starting a lifestyle vlog.
But hold on, let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Yeah.
Isn't the whole point of walking this path that we are, supposed to be spreading the truth?
Sure, absolutely.
So why the heavy gatekeeping? If someone have a good message for you, shouldn't they just share it?
Well, there is a critical distinction we have to make here between sharing a good news and officially instructing. Sharing the basic good news, like introducing someone to the sacred names of Yahweh and Yahshua, or telling a friend about the joy of keeping the seventh-day Sabbath that is a celebration.
It's organic.
Right. That is a joy that absolutely everyone should partake in. You experience something wonderful, you naturally share it. But officially teaching doctrine, or stepping into the role of instructing others in what the texts call right rulings, that carries a massive, sobering weight of accountability.
Okay, let's unpack this, because our mission for today's deep dive is exactly that. We are exploring the strict ancient requirements for teaching the covenant.
We really need to get into this.
We're going to examine the fascinating ancient Hebrew roots of words like fire, storms, and wickedness, and we are going to discover why officially instructing others is vastly different from simply sharing a joyful revelation.
And that distinction is crucial because of a phrase you hear constantly today. Someone will step up to a podium or turn on their smartphone camera and casually announce, "The Spirit led me to teach this today."
Oh, I see that everywhere.
They will claim that divine mandate, even when they have absolutely no foundational education in the Word itself.
It is almost used as a shield, isn't it? If you question their teaching, well, you are questioning the Spirit.
Exactly.
But it makes me think of a medical analogy. If you find a great over-the-counter vitamin that gives you lots of energy, clears your brain fog, you tell your friends about it, you say, "Hey, you should try this. It changed my life."
Which is sharing the good news.
Right. That is sharing the good news. But you do not suddenly put on a white coat, lease a clinic space, and start prescribing heavy, complex medications to people with serious illnesses just because you feel led to do it.
I would actually take that analogy a step further. If you prescribe the wrong medication, you aren't just unhelpful. You can severely harm or even kill someone.
Wow. Yeah.
Handling doctrinal instruction incorrectly is viewed with that exact same level of severity in the Scriptures. Yahweh does indeed appoint instructors, but that appointment demands a rigorous foundational education in the texts. It is not about guessing.
And it's definitely not about gut feelings.
No, there is an explicit scriptural warning that not many people should rush to become teachers, precisely because those who instruct others will receive a much stricter judgment.
A stricter judgment. That completely shifts the tone. When you stand up to teach, you are literally taking the spiritual well-being of others into your hands. If you lead them astray, you are on the hook for it.
Exactly the point. And that idea of a terrifyingly strict judgment leads us directly into the imagery used to describe Yahweh's arrival.
Let's set the scene for that by looking at Psalms chapter 50, verses 1 through 3. The imagery here is incredibly intense.
It really is.
It describes Eloah Yahweh coming, and he's not silent. He is described as coming with a consuming fire and a fearful storm raging all around him.
What's fascinating here is how this specific imagery was perceived historically, especially when we look at the ancient Canaanites. The Canaanites had a highly fragmented pantheon. They had a god for the harvest, a god for fertility, a god for the sea. So when they looked at these intense manifestations of fire and storm, they mistakenly believed that Yahweh was merely a storm or fire god, like he was just some localized weather deity.
Right, like he's just the regional meteorologist of the ancient Near East. They completely misunderstood his nature and contrasted him with their own pagan Elohim, like Baal.
They drastically miscategorized him. Yahweh was actually utilizing the raw elements of fire and storm to demonstrate his absolute true supremacy over all of their supposed deities.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Think about the historical accounts. The terrifying manifestation at Mount Sinai with the lightning, the smoke, the mountain shaking, or later when Elijah prayed and fire fell directly from heaven to consume the altar. These were not the actions of a mere nature deity doing parlor tricks. These were profound, overwhelming demonstrations of ultimate authority over the very fabric of creation.
And to really understand what that means for you and me today, we have to look past the English translation and dig into the ancient Hebrew language. Let's look at the ancient Hebrew word for fire, which is esh.
Yes, esh.
If you look at the ancient pictograph for this word, it doesn't just look like a standard campfire. It actually depicts the specific action of a fire drill.
The ancient method of starting a fire with wood, two pieces being ground against each other.
Yes. The image of pressing two pieces of wood together using intense, exhausting friction to create a tiny ember, which then ignites the tinder. It requires relentless pressure and heat.
The spiritual implications of that friction are profound. This fire has a very specific dual purpose depending on who is encountering it. For the righteous, for those who are genuinely seeking truth, this fire acts as a cleansing agent.
Meaning it purifies.
Exactly. Think about the friction of the word in your own life. It is not always comfortable. It presses the branches, meaning the individual believers together. The friction of learning, of being corrected, of wrestling with the texts, presses them together to make them echad, meaning one. It unifies them through the intense heat of the truth.
But friction, that intense, doesn't just unify. If you apply that much heat and pressure to something brittle or corrupt, it catches fire in a very different way.
That is the serious flip side to the fire of Yahweh. For those who misrepresent the covenant, or those who try to claim the authority to teach without the right to do so, that same fire does not unify them into being echad.
It does the opposite.
It acts as a consuming fire that violently tears away the flesh. It ceases to be a fire of purification and becomes a fire of strict judgment. The same heat that hardens clay will completely melt wax.
Wow, so your structural integrity determines how you experience the fire. Okay, so that covers the fire aspect. Now let's break down the fearful storm mentioned alongside it in that same verse. The ancient Hebrew root for storm is sar, and the pictographs for this word are incredibly vivid. It includes the image of a thorn, the image of a rope, and the image of a head.
Which paints a complex conceptual picture. A storm, in this ancient linguistic context, represents the state of being bound. So, just like with the fire, you have a choice in how you experience the storm of Yahweh.
A choice to be bound to what, exactly?
Well, you're either bound in captivity, tangled in the thorns and the ropes of your own making, facing the storm as an instrument of terror and judgment. You were trapped in the thicket while the hurricane hit.
Or because there has to be a counterpart to that.
Or, if you're securely tethered, bound to the head, meaning Yahweh the storm serves a completely different purpose. Instead of destroying you, the storm actually protects you. It forcefully blows through your life and aggressively strips away all the worldly garbage, the distractions, the false doctrines, and the impurities that simply do not belong there.
So for you listening right now, the message is incredibly urgent. You have to let the fire and the storm of the word cleanse you right now, today. Let the friction press you. Let the storm blow the garbage out of your life while you still have time, so that you can actually survive the ultimate consuming fire later. You desperately want the fire to make you echad, not to consume you.
Which brings us to a very uncomfortable but absolutely necessary question. Who exactly is denied the right to speak? Who is the fire coming to consume? Who is getting tangled in the thorns during the storm?
The text actually doesn't leave us guessing on that. It gets incredibly direct. Moving down in that same chapter to Psalms chapter 50, verses 16 through 17, Yahweh explicitly addresses the wrong or the wicked. He asks them a piercing question. What right have you to recite my statutes or take my covenant in your mouth while you hated instruction and cast my words behind you?
We really need to pause on how we define that word wicked. In modern English, when we hear wicked, we are conditioned to think of someone truly diabolical.
Right.
We picture a hardened criminal, a cartoonish villain tying someone to train tracks, or someone who is intentionally and overtly malicious.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the ancient Hebrew word used there is rasha, and it does not mean a stereotypical movie monster at all.
Not even slightly. The literal translation of rasha is simply one who has departed from the correct path or way. It is a navigational term as much as a moral one.
One who has departed from the path. That completely shifts the entire meaning of the passage. It makes it so much closer to home.
It unpacks the true gravity of this warning. This is not a rebuke aimed at the pagan nations outside the camp who have never heard the name of Yahweh. This is a rebuke aimed squarely at people inside the assembly.
Inside the assembly.
Yes. These are individuals who know the scriptures intimately. They attend the gatherings. They know all the correct vocabulary. They might even hold leadership positions. But behind closed doors, their business practices are corrupt. Their marriages are a mess of their own making. They are living morally incorrect lives.
Or they are doing exactly what verse 17 says, casting the words behind them. Meaning, they read the instructions of the covenant, they see what is required, and they just toss aside the parts they find culturally unpopular or personally inconvenient. They cherry-pick the covenant.
They treat the covenant like a buffet. They are departing from the path while still loudly claiming to walk on it. And Yahweh is saying to them, because you have rejected my instruction in your own private life, you have absolutely zero right to take my covenant in your mouth and try to teach it to someone else.
I want to connect this directly to you, the listener. This is where the rubber meets the road. If you are not living the truth that you claim to know, or if you are quietly tossing aside the specific instructions of the covenant just because they are difficult, you forfeit the right to be a representative. You cannot take Yahweh's covenant in your mouth to instruct others if you are simultaneously casting his words behind your back. It is the definition of hypocrisy.
It is the ultimate standard of integrity. You simply cannot lead someone down a path that you yourself refuse to walk. The blind cannot lead the blind, and the stationary cannot lead the moving.
So if the standard is that uncompromising, what does it actually look like to get it right? What does it look like to walk the path without casting a single thing behind you?
For that, we have to look at the ultimate historical example, which brings us to the events recorded in Matthew chapter 4, verses 1 through 5.
The temptation in the wilderness. The Messiah, Yahshua, has just fasted for 40 days and 40 nights. I want you to really think about the brutal biological reality of that for a second. He is at his absolute weakest physical point. His body is literally starving, beginning to consume itself for energy. He is isolated, exhausted, and vulnerable. And that is the exact calculated moment the enemy arrives to test him.
And pay close attention to the strategy Yahshua uses to defend himself. He doesn't rely on his own inherent authority in that moment. He doesn't debate the enemy with new, clever philosophy. He reaches back and directly quotes the ancient instruction from Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 3. He says, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of Yahweh."
The linguistic connections here between the Greek text of Matthew and the ancient Hebrew of Deuteronomy are just incredible. We cannot gloss over these. Let's break this down because it completely changes how you read that defense.
Let's start with the phrase, "it is written." When Yeshua says that, the Greek word used there is grapo. But if you trace the conceptual root of that Greek word back to the Hebrew mindset he was operating in, it links directly to the word sefer. Now, sefer is not just a casual note. It isn't a sticky note or a fleeting thought jotted down in a journal. A sefer is a meticulously recorded story, an official binding scroll. It carries the massive weight of an eternal covenant document.
It is the official decree of the king. And then there's the word every. He says we must live by every word.
Right. The Greek word for every translates directly back to the Hebrew word kol. And kol doesn't mean a majority of them or the really important foundational ones. It means the absolute, uncompromising, total entirety. It leaves no room for casting anything behind you.
The entirety, meaning every single dabar of Yahweh. And it's important to realize that in Hebrew thought, a dabar isn't just a spoken syllable or a sound wave hitting your ear. It represents the underlying substance, the action, the reality of the thing itself. Every single word has weight. You don't get to pick and choose. You live by the entirety of the dabar.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it reveals a profound spiritual reality about how testing actually works. When you make the commitment to genuinely live by the entire book, when you decide you are not going to be like the Rasha who casts inconvenient words behind them, you are essentially stepping out onto a battlefield. You are declaring your allegiance, and the enemy will inevitably test that allegiance. And just like he did with the Messiah in the wilderness, the enemy is a master tactician. He's going to time that test for when you're at your absolute weakest point.
That is such a sobering thought. He's not going to attack you when you are feeling strong, when you just had a great Sabbath gathering, and you are surrounded by a supportive community. He's going to hit you on a random Tuesday when you are tired, when you are financially stressed, when you feel isolated, when you are hungry.
And in that moment of weakness, you won't have the energy to come up with a new defense. The only thing that will sustain you is the entirety of the word that you have already embedded deeply inside yourself. If you have cast parts of it away because you didn't like them, you will have massive gaps in your armor. But if you have embraced the whole sefer, every single dabar, You will have the structural integrity to stand.
So what does this all mean? Let's bring all these incredible, heavy threads together. We started this deep dive by asking what actually gives someone the right to represent Yahweh in a world full of self-proclaimed teachers. And what we have found is that it requires so much more than just a good heart, good intentions, or a desire to share something positive on social media.
It requires a rigorous foundational education in the texts. It requires walking the path and living morally according to the correct way, not just memorizing the vocabulary to sound spiritual.
It requires willingly allowing that fearful storm and that pressing, exhausting fire of the word to cleanse you right now, letting the friction do its work, stripping away your pride and the garbage in your life, unifying you with the truth.
And above all, it demands embracing the absolute entirety of the scriptures. Every single day bar without leaving anything behind or casting it over your shoulder the moment it challenges your lifestyle.
So as we wrap up, I want you to ask yourself a very serious question about your own walk. How are you handling the incredible knowledge of the covenant that you possess? Are you acting as a branch, willingly letting the friction of the word press you into unity, into becoming ecod with the truth and the body? Or are you running away, avoiding the heat, and secretly tossing the difficult, demanding instructions out the window?
It is a question of profound personal accountability. The standard for teaching and representing the king is intentionally high because the stakes are quite literally eternal. We cannot lower the standard just to make it more accessible.
And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over today as you go about your week. We have spent a lot of time talking about surviving the storm, about letting it blow the worldly garbage out of your life so you can stand firm. But consider this, when that fearful storm of Yahweh's word finally does blow through your life, and it successfully strips away all the worldly attachments, all the false comforts, and all the distractions you have been clinging to, what exactly are you planning to build in the empty space it leaves behind?